as Caitlin described, I'm on the sustainability working group and the what we call the defined working group, coming up with a new museum definition. So I'm interested in having this conversation today and answering any questions people may have about culture and sustainability.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So as Adam mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about kind of these issues and our experiences with this, but would love to hear from you all. Of course, if you have questions at any point, please feel free to put them in the chat. Also, please feel free to interject or interrupt. We will have some designated time at the end for asking questions, but if you have anything you'd like to bring up during the conversation, please feel free to do so. Either, we're a small group, so either please feel free to just interject, or if you want to raise your hand, that's also fine, of course. But yeah, of course, really looking forward to hearing from you all about if you have any questions about this nexus of culture and sustainability, because as we mentioned, it's not necessarily something that everyone thinks about every day. So I wanted to start off talking a little bit today about kind of this inside outside situation, this dichotomy of practicing what you preach. And one of the issues that we've really found within the cultural sector is that practicing sustainability is not something that it is, well, in my opinion, is a little bit far behind in the cultural sector, rather as opposed to other sectors, which maybe have a little more mobility. And it's really interesting because when we talk to institutions about sustainability, there's a couple of different barriers, and I'd love to hear Diana's point of view on this as well, to why a lot of institutions haven't necessarily moved over towards greener practices. And this is actually the reason why I started Key Culture in the first place, was I was looking at what these barriers were and how we could overcome them. And one of them was a lack of time, especially within the cultural sector. We have a situation where people are overworked and underpaid. I think this is maybe also true with the sustainability word in general, but there's a lot of expectation to do things for free. And sustainability tended to be something that was done by people who were passionate about it, but it wasn't their full-time job. And there are very few institutions in the world that have sustainability directors within the organization or can afford to hire sustainability consultants. And, for example, Diana and the Working Group on Sustainability, we're a group of 14 volunteers from all over the world. And, we all have full-time jobs and 500,000 other obligations. And so sometimes sustainability can kind of be put to the back burner a little bit. Another one that I found was a lack of expertise, especially when it comes to collections care and collections management. A lot of institutions think, well, solutions that work in the business sector or in other sectors aren't applicable to us because we have special needs. And so there seemed to be kind of this lack of integrating sustainability into culture, because there was kind of this barrier between understanding sustainability jargon and understanding cultural jargon. And so how do we actually marry those? And then the last one was a lack of communication. And I think that this is actually just a problem globally. But I don't know, Diana, if you have anything else you wanted to kind of add about what you see some of the barriers are in terms of integrating sustainability into cultural practices.
Well, one thing I'd like to bring up is the fact that I think museums too are trying to see how they can integrate sustainability into all areas of their operations.
Yeah.
So you have on one level the recycling, the energy audits, the HVAC systems, etc. But then too, a lot of museums are concentrating more on their relationship to the community and how can the museum challenge the structural inequities, inequalities, and and meet the equity of the community, and not just concentrate on collections. So there's this role that a museum plays with its local community. Mm-hmm. And then, as I think Kara brought up, is the educational programs. A lot of museum staff have an educational program they can be training their staffs on educating the public on sustainability and how it fits in with cultural heritage and the greater world. And then one of the more controversial things that has come up more recently is taking a closer look at museum endowments and board of trustees and looking at the divestiture of energy stocks and the types of people that museums are selecting to be on the board of their museums. So I think there's a variety of ways that sustainability has crept into the overall operations of museums today, and it's very different than it was 10 years ago.
Yeah. And I think that's a really excellent point, what you're talking about with divestment, because one of the problems we have in the cultural sector, I was on a advisory committee for the European Commission called Voices of Culture. And we took a deep look into kind of the economic sustainability of culture and how that affects all of the other SDGs in terms of being incorporated into culture. And, you know, it really does boil down to money. And in a lot of situations, I know that, you know, we work with a wide variety of museums all over the world. And in a lot of places, they say, well, you know, we're government run, so we are at the whim of the government, and this is a political issue. Or indeed, our board of directors is, you know, doesn't feel that this is a priority, and so we don't have permission to start engaging with climate, or to, you know, put up an exhibition about climate because it's too political. And I think that that's one of the really big issues, is that because we're not an economically sustainable sector, it makes it very difficult for us to be activists for sustainability and for climate change in general. But I think, as you said, like what we're looking at right now is that there's this changing role of museums within our society. It's no longer just, you know, a place to house collections and we can be neutral and silent and, you know, just do our thing. But it's more, how can we start engaging with the community? How can we incorporate issues of climate into our educational programs, into our exhibitions? And how can we, be better advocates for society? And so that kind of brings me to my big question for you, Diana, and that would be, you know, when we're talking about the Museum Define, could you tell us a little bit more about how that process works and what we're looking at and how we can get sustainability into that definition and what that would mean?
Well, actually, I think some of these ideas that I was just talking about have crept into the Define process. The way ICOM has set up the methodology for coming up with the museum definition is they have a series of organizations within ICOM. There are national committees, international committees, regional alliances, and affiliated organizations. And they've asked each of these groups to come up with 20 keywords or concepts that would define a museum. And that was turned into the committee about a month ago. And right now we've hired data analysts who are looking at, you know, over thousands of words and trying to figure out how to group them so that we can take a look at what this result is, because we're talking about groups from all over the world, not just the United States or Europe or Canada. So there's quite a difference in the types of concepts. And then we'll look at that, analyze that, and then this, I think in August, we'll go back to the committees and say, this is what we found. These are the top keywords and concepts. Is something left out? But then also, again, because we're talking about museums all over the world, there are some museums who maybe cannot use certain words because of their political situation or, you know, their operation or whatever. So we're asking also, are there any of these words that you cannot use, that you would not be able to use this museum definition if it had this word in it? And yeah.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Yeah, so then we'll go back and see what's left, and then also see if there's additions. And this is where, you know, I think people can look at how sustainability has been reflected in all the submissions, and if it was used by enough committees or organizations that it rose to a high level. But we can all at this point say, you know, you've left out certain concepts relating to sustainability. And then the committee will take all these words and come up with, I mean, it'll basically be up to take words and draft them into some type of definition. And I think the idea is that we'll probably come up with 3 or 5 definitions that then the committees can review, and will ultimately narrow it down to one definition in time for our triennial in Prague in August of 2022. So that's the process. We'll see what happens.
Yes, and I know this is not the first time we've tried to do this. I know this is the second iteration.
Yeah, this is a totally different methodology.
Yeah,
where it's been opened up to everybody. So everyone's had a chance to weigh in on this.
This is my question though, because it's open up to everybody within ICOM. And I find it very interesting, and this is totally me with my key culture hat on here. But I find it interesting because we were talking about, you know, the changing role of museums and how museums are not just for museums anymore, but this importance of connecting with the communities. So is it not worthwhile to kind of, you know, bring in different communities and the general public and kind of get an understanding of what other people outside of ICOM or outside of the museum sector think the role of museums is or should be?
Well, actually, that was left up to the national committees and to a certain extent the other organizations. I know for ICOM US, we did consult with, we had a series of webinars dealing with different topics on museums, and then we did a final survey, and anybody, I mean, the survey was broadcast widely. Anybody could do the survey. We did limit it to people within the US because there are these other national committees. So, but the people who responded to the survey were not necessarily ICOM members. I mean, a lot of them were, but they weren't limited to that. And we did actually, we were very interested in seeing what the indigenous community thought. And they also have museums and cultural programs. So we made sure we included a number of these organizations. And they provided us with some key concepts as well. So it actually is open. I mean, it really depends. Some national committees may want to limit it to their members. I don't know of any that actually did. I mean, I think it was pretty broad. But one of the things is we will be publishing, maybe not so much how each committee went about gathering their words, but we will at some point, if we have to get permission from the individual committees, but we will on the ICOM website publish the words that everybody sent in.
Oh,
which will be interesting.
Yeah, that'll be really interesting. And I just out of curiosity, I don't know if you can divulge this or not, but is our sustainability and climate in there?
I don't know, because we haven't gotten the information back from the data analyst. We're going to be getting that in the next week or two. Okay. So we'll see what happens.
Well, that'll be really interesting. I'm very curious how that goes. So, but it's great to hear that, you know, that the discussion is being opened up to the general public and also, of course, to indigenous communities. I think that's something that's hugely important that, you know, is also part of the changing role of museums and, you know, this changing perception of how we care for collections and whose collections they are and who are we actually doing this for. So I think that's really interesting. But I was thinking a lot I've been doing a lot, obviously, with kind of the climate impact of museums as institutions. And of course, you have a lot of more experience in ICOM, and you have, experience working within museums. And I was just curious kind of what you saw as barriers for taking climate action within institutions, and what the discussion is about the climate, the environmental footprint of the cultural sector.
Yeah, I'd say the biggest barriers are probably politics and local communities, because the United States is made up of a whole variety of communities, and there are some regions in the U.S. And I'm speaking more from the U.S. standpoint rather than the world, but it's probably applicable to the world that there are some communities who would not be interested in talking about sustainability. But I feel like that's the role of the museum, to put that in their educational programming and figure out a way of approaching people, basically trying to reach people where they are and not, be heavy-handed and beat them up over all the facts and figures.
Yeah,
I think you have to, in some cases, go slow, but I think there is some resistance in some parts of the world, and definitely of the U.S. But museum people tend to be pretty strong in this direction, I think. So it's just a matter of time.
Yeah, I think so.
And there's, as you mentioned before, there's also board of trustees who may not support it, but that's where I think there is an active movement now of getting rid of individual board members who don't support it, and in some cases board members whose occupations may not support it. So I know in New York there's been a lot of active protests at the Whitney and some other museums, looking at individual board members and what they do with their lives, besides give money to museums. And people are starting to look at where the money from museums is coming from.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think it's a pretty hot topic.
Yeah, for sure. And I know that, I live in the Netherlands. Well, I'm partly in the Netherlands, partly in the US. But here, of course, there's the divestment from Shell. And Shell was a huge supporter of both the Van Gogh Museum, the Rijksmuseum, among several others. And the Van Gogh Museum was the first one to divest. And the Rijksmuseum recently divested as well. But it's, a huge discussion. And it's also problematic because, as the cultural sector, we know we struggle financially. And one of the problems that we've had at Key Culture is that cultural institutions, generally speaking, say we don't have any money for sustainability. And so they're struggling anyway. And then now there's all this pressure to, remove their funders, which, obviously we support that because we don't want to be working with companies like Shell. But then where is the money going to come from? Where's the replacement going to come from? And I think that's what causes this kind of panic in the sector, is that, yeah, okay, we're going to divest and make a statement, and we're not going to take support from these, fossil fuel companies or people that, the Koch brothers at the Met, as along with other families that have vast fortunes from precarious places. But it's difficult because then where are the replacement funds coming from? And I think that's one of the big fears, is that cultural sector in general is very short-sighted when it comes to financing, because it's very survival mode constantly, and especially after COVID. Museums got hit really hard because most of them have been closed for so long. So I think it's not an easy discussion. And the thing that we have found at Key Culture is, as I already mentioned, this monetary barrier. I mean, I come to people and I say, we've created this program. It's called Key Futures. It's literally everything you need to be sustainable. We offer training, we offer mentorship, we offer, an online portal to connect, everything that you need. And people are like, oh, that's great. And then I say, it costs €300 a month. Nope, sorry, we don't have the budget for it. Not happening. And so then it's also really interesting because if you look at the foundation side of things, a lot of people haven't made this connection between culture and sustainability. So when you talk to foundations that work with culture, they say we don't do sustainability, and vice versa. You talk to foundations that work with sustainability, and they say, well, we don't do culture. So it's an interesting, because it's such a niche thing, but the issue here is that it's really niche, but it has such a phenomenal potential. And that opportunity of using the 95,000 museums in the world, and that's just museums, like, and then we can open it up to performing art spaces or artists or galleries, to be advocates for climate action and advocates for sustainability. And, I mean, we reach billions of people a year, and it's a way to connect people to these issues on a more emotional level. I mean, art has that empathetic capacity to get people to care about things. And that cultural paradigm shift that we need can come from culture. And it's just a matter of being able to advocate for it effectively. I think culture is the key to doing that. But of course, it's really important that we practice what we preach. So we have kind of a lot of different intricacies between that.